Well, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Ryan Mears. I'm your Marion County Prosecutor, and what a great group of people we have here today. And we've been kind of on hiatus. We've done these virtually the last couple of years. This is our first live and in-person one that we've done since the pandemic. And I just want to thank everybody for coming out here. One of the things I enjoy most about being prosecutor is I get a chance to interact with people in the community. And thank you for everyone for attending here today as we kind of tackle another issue and another topic that we're dealing with in our community. When we're going to talk about root causes of violence today. We've got a great group of speakers today. But also just want to say thank you to everyone who participated in our first two sessions. If you or a friend missed our first session or second session, you can check us out on YouTube, on our YouTube page. We're going to post these. And then our good friends at Channel 16 also are recording these as well, and so they will be available to anybody who'd like to watch them. So thank you to everyone for their willingness to participate. Today we have gone a little bit international. I did just want to recognize that we have the new Mexican consulate with us here today. So if everybody could just give her a hand. Feel very fortunate and honored that she's here joining us today, and grateful for all the work that she does in her community and all the advocacy that she does that really makes Indianapolis such a tremendously vibrant place. She has a big job with a big responsibility, covers a very wide geographic area, and really does a great work and a great service to everybody in the area and in the region. So wanted to say thank you for all your work and thank you for being here. We always appreciate it. The reason we do this Community Justice Academy is we're always looking for opportunities to have that direct engagement with people in the community. And as many of you know, the topics that we have are generated by conversations that we have with people in the community. And one of the topics that we're going to tackle today is the root cause of violence that takes place in our community. And it really started with a program that we did with Voices, actually. And so last year, I had kind of a crazy idea. I wanted to, so there was a panel involving kids who participated in Voices, and one of the kids who was on the panel said to me, he said, "You guys, being the adults, don't listen to us and don't understand what we're going through." And I said, "You know something, you're right." And so we worked with Voices. We got a group of kids together. I said, I want you guys to talk about the issue of violence in our community. And then I want you to put together an ad campaign. We reached out to a billboard company. They agreed to pay for the cost of the billboard. And all around our community, you saw billboards that were created by young people about the issue of violence in our community because they felt like they didn't have an outlet to express themselves about what was going on with them and what was going on in their community. And one of the things that impressed me was not only the level of awareness that these kids had, but they immediately told me root causes are the issue. Root causes are the problem, and they saw so many people who were engaged in violence, who were victim of violence, that they would tell you those are not bad kids. They come from bad circumstances and bad situations. And that was really what the billboard campaign was all about, was how can we better address those root causes of violence that exist in our community. And I was grateful for the work that everybody at Voices was willing to do with us. And it was a really successful campaign, but it also spurred on that conversation of how can we do a better job of having conversations about what are the things that truly drive violence in our community, and how can all of us, as people who are civically engaged and care about our community, how can we be more involved to make a difference in our community. And so today we have two panelists who have dedicated their lives to helping young people and making a difference in our community by working with young people to address those root causes and provide opportunities for individuals. We have Kia Wright from Voices and Anthony Beverly. I think Ms. Wright is going to speak first, but I'm going to introduce them first, and then we'll just have them come up one after another, and then we're going to do a discussion that I'm going to moderate about kind of some of the topics that you've heard, and then open it up for audience questions. And so if you have questions, hang on to those till the end, and we'll be sure to ask those. And so just a quick bio on each of those individuals. Ms. Wright is the founder and executive director of Voices Corp. She's a graduate of Lawrence Central High School in Indianapolis. She went to Indiana State on a full track and field scholarship. She earned her master's degree in criminology. Ms. Wright obtained employment with the Vigo County Juvenile Probation Department in 2004, where she developed a passion for community development. She then worked for Marion County Juvenile Probation. She gained a better understanding of systematic trauma and root causes of delinquent and criminal behavior. Utilizing the power of the arts, in 2010, she founded Voices with a vision of empowering communities of color to restore themselves through communal healing, artistic expression, and economic mobility. Voices was created to center the lived experience of Black and brown communities and to provide safe spaces for self-expression and to begin the journey of healing. Today, Voices Corp services 36 Indianapolis zip codes, 7 counties, and serves 700 youth and families annually. Give it up for Ms. Wright. I next want to introduce at forward 6'5" from Tennessee State University, a good friend of mine, Anthony Beverly, who is the co-director of Stop the Violence Indianapolis with his wife Beatrice. This is a community organization for social change, empowering people to act within the Indianapolis area to ensure safety, justice, accountability, and healing for people whose lives are affected by violence and poverty. Anthony has over 20 years of youth and family ministry programming, life coaching, counseling, and career training. He graduated from ADEX and then Tennessee State University. Stop the Violence Indianapolis was created with the purpose of assisting others through education and a broader awareness of positive alternatives with programs that we offer to reduce gun violence, gang violence, domestic violence within the city of Indianapolis. I'm looking forward to this very thoughtful discussion. We'll hear from Ms. Wright, we'll hear from Mr. Beverly, and then I will moderate kind of a discussion between the two of them, and then we'll open it up for questions from the group. We do have refreshments in the back. If anybody is interested, please feel free to help yourselves. Thank you for being here, and with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Wright. Whatever you want to do. Okay.
Can you guys hear me okay if I don't use a mic or? No. You got it. Is that better, everybody? Yes. It's so weird sometimes hearing the bio right out loud. I'm super grateful to be here and talking and spending time with you guys. Voices was started for me out of frustration as my work as a juvenile probation officer in the east side of Indy. I was in Renaissance, which is an alternative school there. So all the young people that had some troubles in school that were suspended or expelled was coming to Renaissance, and I was a probation officer for that site. Most of my caseload were young Black men. Actually, the majority, 87% were young Black men, high school age. There was lots of frustrations from administrators and teachers in that space, and I felt use my position there to solve school issues, right? It was just kick them out, it was file a violation, lock them up, issue a warrant. I'm like, these are crappy decisions that they're doing, but for me, it didn't rise to the level of court involvement for you and start that entry into the system. At the same time, all of my friends were artists, so we were hosting open mics around the city. We were at each other's houses around a bonfire. I'm an athlete, so that wasn't my thing, but it was this healing energy that was there in these spaces, and I noticed the topics that were freely being discussed, right? And I married those two worlds. I literally started bringing in my friends to work with the kids that I had on my caseload to figure out, why are we kicking in doors? Why are we carrying guns? Why are we doing these things? So it literally started out as solving school beef through rap battles. That turned into poetry slams school-wide. That spread to after-school art programs. But throughout all of that, through their art, through their raps and their poetry, for us is when we got to the root cause of what was going on. Because these babies were talking about seeing death every single day. They were writing lyrics about the lack of education quality that they felt they were getting. They were talking about domestic violence. They were talking about living in poverty. They were talking about not having access. And so for us, it just became clear, no, he's not going to pay attention in your classroom because the child was hungry. Or he had experienced losing his best friend last night. So how do we wrap services around these youth and these communities and let them drive it? You know, they're closest to it, so how do we allow them to be in a position to drive it? Fast forward 12 years, we're here. We're working with kids all over the city in multiple different capacities. We have youth leadership programs. We do home-based case management. We have a day reporting program strictly for young men in Marion County that a court ordered to us through juvenile probation. Do a lot with alternative education, making sure that they're still getting educated even though they are expelled out of a traditional school system. We have family liberation and reentry. We have all these different programs and services, you know, to really try to get to the root cause, is to be able to build up the emotional intelligence, to make sure they have access to jobs and employment and those kind of things. And most importantly, putting them in positions to make decisions about the care and their own treatment. Specifically communities of color historically have known how to heal, how to be resilient, and provided the resources and opportunities. And so how do we let communities and youth drive those initiatives? That's a little bit about voices.
Well, while he's pulling it up, I wasn't going to do a presentation, but then when your older sister called and said, I'm going to be there, you're going to represent. I saw a flyer and I'm proud that you're going to be speaking, so I'm going to be there. And I was like, oh, Lord. I got to represent the family. So since this morning, I've been pulling together my presentation and then got caught in a traffic accident on the way here. And so that's why I was late. But while he's doing that, again, my name is Anthony. I'm the director of Stop the Violence in Indianapolis. And, I got thrown in the fire when I was 17 years old by my mentor who, when crack cocaine was pretty tough in the Indianapolis area. I grew up on Indiana Avenue. When Indiana Avenue was the 42nd and Post of Indianapolis. I walked through a police shootout. I've had a sawed-off shotgun to my head by a friend and I played high school basketball against. And, and been robbed by the neighborhood wino. And so I knew that God had a purpose for my life, and I wanted to be able to, fulfill that purpose. And so my mentor gave me an opportunity to run the task force against crack cocaine, and here I am, 25 years later, still doing the same thing. And so, of course, when Prosecutor Marion call you and say, hey, I want you to be a part of this event, somebody who's been doing a great job with the youth and men that I've worked with, several men have dealt with issues, around poverty, around, single parent homes, around education, and all of those kind of things. And so the work and the offices and the programs that he has at the center has helped at least 100 of the guys that I work with over the last couple of years. Restoring driver's license, child support, all of those kind of things. And so here I am today to present. So thank you, Prosecutor Marion, and the entire team for inviting me to be here to speak. And then I got Brandon Randu in the crowd, so I better do my best because he's certainly going to critique. And I'm going to hear from him later. But this is a quote from the book, The Faces of Violence. At the heart of violence lies the wish to show ourselves men with a will. But the complexity of society makes the man lose heart. Nothing he does any longer seems to skill to be proud in a world where others get the positive headlines. Let that sink in. And I'm speaking from a black man's perspective, growing up in the city of Indianapolis, who was very close to making some real bad decisions at a young age. But I had a mentor. So I'm going to go over a couple of definitions here. Discrimination, oppression, prejudice, systematic. I'll highlight two of them, oppression and systematic. You can read the others yourself. Oppression is the social system that always benefits one group that has the power and the dominance, while always abusing or harming another group without the same level of power. Systematic. Systematic describes the way in which different perspectives or perceptions are able to be expressed with power discrimination and prejudice become systematic oppression against individuals and groups. I want those to sink in because, you know, I hear all the time, you know, slavery didn't do anything, it shouldn't have any impact on you today, that was hundreds of years ago, whatever the case is. But I can honestly tell you, it impacts us today. There's a few other definitions, but I'm going to go over those. I wanted to highlight those other two. Who recognizes this picture? Anybody recognize this picture? You know this guy's name? I'm going to come back to it. So here I just want to kind of highlight historical timeline that I've been putting together for over the years, trying to understand, you know, way back and how we get forward. Again, I won't go through all of that, but we were kings and queens back in the day. And now we move all the way to the information age, and we're fatherless, no men in the home. And our hearts are turning away from our children. These are some boundary ideas, historical time periods in America. Boundary ideas we had back in the day, we had co-op neighborhoods. We had co-op daycares and those kind of things. Where if everybody on the block worked but one or two people, who's responsible for the children in the neighborhood? The other neighbors. Fast forward, dying ideas. I remember, my sister knows, Daddy always told us, you get $1, save something out of it. Put 10% in church, put X amount in the bank, take, you know, we don't do those things anymore. Those things are dying. Community involvement, it was a must. Being compassionate about your neighborhood, that was automatic. I mean, you grew up in that area. Quality education, I went to Crispus Attucks High School. I came on the tail end of Attucks when the teachers knew everybody, they knew my whole family. So I couldn't go to school without them knowing my parents. Then he said root causes. So we got the systems, the welfare system, the education system, which Kia just talked about, redlining, Voting Rights Act, gerrymandering, and the justice system. And I'm still working on this chart. Welfare system, teen pregnancy, fatherlessness, so on and so forth. Education system, the push out, drop out, school to prison pipeline. You see all of those things up there. The historical and contemporary forces that have been used to demean, distort, damage, and or deliberate the mindset and overall psychological well-being of black men, African American people, has resulted in high rates of violence in the black community. You say, why is the black community having so much violence? Why are they shooting and killing each other? Why is there so much black on black crime? Well, if you live in a certain neighborhood where people are angry and upset and been abused, then what do you expect? You say, well, it happens in other neighborhoods too, but not at the same rate. Why? We can discuss those. I showed you in the chart, some of the other issues. I want to break this one down a little bit. This is city government. Gerrymandering was a problem, or still is a problem. Voter suppression. Short hours of voting places, knowing that people have to work. All of those different type things. criminal justice system, disproportionately, she just shared with you, she was working at the Renaissance Center, and 80% were black males. And this still exists today. Now, this is my niece. She's 13 years old now. At the time, she was 5 years old. And I'm going to tie this back to the first picture that I showed you. I was watching her one day when her mom had to work, and I'm trying to get some work done. I'm at the house working from home, trying to get some work done, and she kept trying to get my attention. I'm like, stop, let me get this done. Kept trying to get my attention. So finally I said, okay. I stopped, I started taking pictures. Hey, you're beautiful. All of that. I love you. All of a sudden she just started smiling. A big smile, because I stopped what I was doing to give her attention. Shortly after that, the news came on. Remember that? When he was first walking down the hall, this is Simeon Adams, this is 2014. He was walking down the hallway, he was headed to court, and when he was walking down the hallway, his head was down. The minute the cameras came around the corner and threw the cameras in his face, he rose up his head and put a big smile on his face. What was that about? Then I started thinking, I just had the experience with my 5-year-old niece who was begging for attention. This 16-year-old kid had a very, very traumatic experience. Bounced around from family member to family member, moved to Texas because they didn't want him here, had too many problems there, they shot him back up in Indianapolis. One Friday night, he was approached by a group in the streets. They saw that he had a gun on him. He had just shot up, according to the reports that was given, he had shot up a lemonade and steak place, but nobody addressed the issue. The next morning, all the news, Trappizano, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, 16th Street, is dead. He's the accused person. You're walking to the courtroom. Your head is down. The cameras turn on you. And the first thing you do is raise your head up and you start smiling. You see the connection? Black men in this country, in this city, just want to be recognized as men. They want to be recognized as men. And we don't get a chance to do that very often. Our families are broken, and that starts a chain, a ripple effect. And so I wanted to leave you with this picture so we can have the discussion when he has the panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys very much for both your presentations, and I guess just to start the discussion here, and Anthony, you use this term systematic, and there's a lot of conversation about systematic. And I want to take you actually back to a CJA we did a couple of years ago on redlining. And we talked about, or I gave a presentation, we had the Housing Authority give a presentation on redlining and how the impact of redlining still impacts our community today. It depressed property values, which in turn, in fact, had a pretty significant impact on the schools in those neighborhoods. For those of you who don't know, the 30-second version is banks discriminated against historically African-American neighborhoods, which depressed the real estate value there, which was an impediment to people building wealth. The negative property values then impacted the schools. And this is not something that happened hundreds of years ago. This is something that happened 50 years ago. And if you look at the redlining map that the banks used in Marion County, and then you put over it the violent crime map in terms of where the violent crime hotspots it's almost a carbon copy. To me, redlining is an example of systematic issues that we're still dealing with today and the consequences of those issues. That's one example. Anthony used the term systematic. That's right, you've talked about systematic issues before. In addition to redlining, what are some systematic issues that you guys see in our community today, and how does that impact our community and our young people when we talk about root causes of violence?
Well, one that I am most, familiar and comfortable speaking about is juvenile justice and education spaces. What I saw as a juvenile probation officer were young black men being incarcerated and detained at rates 2 to 3 times higher than their white peers. I saw them being committed to Department of Correction and placement facilities 2 to 3 times higher than their white peers. Expelled, suspended 2 to 3 times higher than their white peers. And so it forced us to look at it, right? Why are they getting kicked out at higher rates? Why are they being arrested and detained? And so that led us to a couple of different things. When we talk about safety in neighborhoods, sometimes the automatic answer is more law enforcement, more to increase safety. We need to put more cops on the street. But what that is doing is over-policing black and brown neighborhoods, which causes them to have 2 or 3 times rates of contact with police, right? And so they're inherently in contact with police officers a lot more, which means they're being arrested more, they're being detained more. When we look at what we use to determine if a youth should be detained, right, there is a standard risk assessment tool that they use. It doesn't take into account a lot of the cultural things in the neighborhoods. For instance, the increased rates of police or contact with the police is one of the questions on there. Black and brown youth are going to inherently have more because they're over-policed. And so things like that, for me, is why we're seeing an increase in that school-to-prison pipeline, why we're seeing increased rates of recidivism and arrest with black and brown youth. That would be where I would start.
And I would just add to that, the education system as well. We went from, regular public schools to now charter schools. And we're still having the same issues because the charter schools are supposed to be better education, blah, 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 blah. But we're still seeing the same thing. The difference is now we have charter schools, which I call public-private, because they are pretty much private, but they're public. And it's that old representation, taxation without representation. We don't get to choose who's on these boards for the charters. And we're in a huge fight for who's on the IPS boards, Warren Township boards. So we get a chance to choose those, but we don't get a chance to choose who's on the charter boards. But we're still having the same problems, and it's all systematic. And so I'm gonna put it this way: our black boys on the auction block, going to the highest bidder. They're going to the highest bidder. Brandon just had a thing this past weekend. One of the kids, to her point, Kia's point, one of the boys said it was a big fight at one of the high schools, and their answer was more police. And what did the police come in to do? Slam the girl against the wall, bust her head. So those are systematic issues that continue to cause more violence and more harm versus reducing violence and harm. And then people say, well, that doesn't happen in white schools. Yes, it does. The difference is, what I've seen is more white schools, they get a pass. They get a pass. And so when they go to the court system is, don't mess up again, I'm gonna put you on probation. If you get, probation and you serve out this probation, then this won't end up on your record. And you can still go to college, or you can still go to the military, or you can still go get a good job. So what happens? We just don't see it. The last thing I'll share about the education system is grade violence. I think it's changed now. I need to go back and look at it. But the grading system is different. In some school systems, A average is a 90 to 100. Why is it in IPS 93 to 100? So if I get a 92 on a test, what grade is that? That's a B. In another school system, I get a 90 on a test, what is that? That's an A. So you got a 4-point student and a 3-point student, according to the grading systems. And so those are some of the systematic things that we deal with regularly, and there's a whole list of them that I can go down, but I'll stop there.
And I guess just to provide context when we talk about systematic issues, I think one of the easiest areas to quantify this is in traffic stops, when you both kind of mentioned the issue of over-policing. And so one of the great things about being the prosecutor and hopefully having an open mind about this issue is a lot of really smart people want to work with us. And so Stanford University actually came in and they analyzed a bunch of traffic stops in Marion County. And one of the things that was apparent was that if you were a person of color, you were more likely to be pulled over. And as a consequence, because you were more likely to be pulled over, you were more likely to get a ticket or arrested on a resist charge. But it all started because the number of stops had increased, or you saw a greater proportion of people being stopped for what most people would consider minor traffic offenses. I'm not talking about people driving 150 miles on 38th Street. I'm talking about we're going to proactively patrol, which usually means they're going to be more aggressive looking for violations. They see a violation, someone gets pulled over. And the result of that is, if you go to our traffic court, African Americans are overly represented in people who are facing tickets and things like those issues. And then if you go to our second chance fair, once again, you see that over-representation. And so if more police presence is not the answer, as people who are involved in the community every single day, and that over-policing is not the answer, what solution would you like to see as a response from law enforcement when we have these issues of violence and the knee-jerk reaction is we need more police? If you were to make those decisions and deploy those resources as community-based folks, what would you like to see occur? And I'll start with you, Ms. Wright.
We have to match the same energy that's going into the criminal justice complex with resources for mental health, mentoring, education, employment, in a community-centered way. I think that our schools and Black and brown communities are suffering from lack of resources. And once they're suffering from lack of resources, right? And it's creating these conditions that are hard for the schools to manage what's going on. We have a lack of resources going towards mental health. There's tons of agencies and partnerships and community programs that are capable of doing the work if they are adequately funded. We have to also figure out a way to create some better pathways for the students that are getting expelled and suspended to get back to a traditional school. And we have to figure out a way how to wrap these schools around in community-based services. They are not equipped, that's not their job. And how do we provide these resources to these different community organizations, entities, and educational spaces to really do this holistic well-being approach, right? How do we really provide these services in a way that's meaningful and that are intentional about building relationships, about healing communities, about increasing empathy? We have to look at all of that. And if there's that much energy going into, increased law enforcement or locking them up more, we have to match that same energy with resources to prevent those things from happening.
And I definitely agree with that. And I'll just add, one of the slides I had up there was the welfare system. We need to restore families. We need to restore families so we have two-parent homes. We got a family right now, and the mother's made some bad decisions, ended up getting locked up, had a child while she was in prison, and now here she is reconnecting with her 16-year-old son, and they're struggling. And the charge that put her in prison was trying to take care of her children, so she made the best decisions that she could to take care of her children. But what if she had a two-parent home where there were two incomes? You know, so how do we restore families? And instead of penalizing people, how do we encourage people to do the right thing versus trying to beat the system?
You guys have all kind of touched on schools and the issue of education, and there's certainly disparities that exist in education in our community. Having had the opportunity to spend time around young people, one of the things that has always struck me is how kids at a very young age understand they're not getting the same opportunity that other kids in our community are getting. And that educational disparity is apparent to 10-year-olds. You're looking at a group of really civically engaged people who care about this community, who are probably also recognize or know that those disparities exist. What can we do to directly address that for the individual? Well, let's start with the kids. You guys in your role at Voices and Stop the Violence, when you deal with kids who understand, hey, I haven't gotten the same educational opportunities as other kids in this community. I know it, I've known it since I was in 4th grade. How do you address that? And how do you deal with that in your everyday mentorship and work with kids?
What we have been doing is training them to advocate about those issues. So we have a program called Power and Promise, and it trains young people ages 12 to 24 on these kind of issues, right? It trains them how to tell their story. It trains them on community organizing, empathy, relationship building, and they get paid to go through that program. It's a paid stipend. We're in 10 local schools in the Marion County Jail as well. And what that program does is really, like I said, it trains them to be able to advocate for these issues. I think adults fall into that trap a lot of, making decisions for youth and communities because we don't feel like they are capable sometimes of making those kind of decisions or having that kind of meaningful, input in these kind of things, especially with policy. And then we put them in positions of power, right? So if we're connected to a committee that deals with education, we're putting a youth on that panel, on that committee with them. We're partnering with different schools on how can you get youth on your board of directors, you know what I mean? Putting them in positions to really advocate for that. And we're also hiring them, you know what I mean? And I think that's what it looks like just doing this, this community approach is really figuring out where are their dreams at, right? We always say we're meeting folks where they're at, but they don't want to be there either. So where are they dreaming? And how do we provide the support, resource, and the access for those dreams to be realized? And trust them when they tell us what the issue is. There's tons of community forums that are happening all the time, and we hear from community members that X, Y, and Z needs to be happening. Believe them and make it happen.
Yes, that's a tough question, but every individual is a little different. But one of the things that I think that we're starting to do a little bit better in doing is helping, like she said, helping youth and young men dream. And so we're asking them to look at themselves 5 years, 10 years down the road. Psychologists have said that if you can help a child see themselves in their future and give them the steps to get there, they're more likely to achieve whatever their dream is. And so one of the things that we do with our boys is we bring them in, and after the assessment process is we say, what do you see yourself in 5 years? Just give me one goal that you can see yourself doing in 5 years. And of course, most of them start off sports or something like that. So anything with sports, anything with music. Where do you see yourself? Then they go to construction. Then they go to some of the other jobs and opportunities. And to my surprise, some of them go to, I want to own my own business. And so we help them see themselves there in 5 years today. And when they can see taking those little steps to get there, and they accomplish, those little goals, then they begin to say, I can do this. I can overcome. But it takes a lot of patience, a lot of patience, a lot of patience, and a lot of patience, and a lot of love. And they know when you care, because they'll call you out in the beginning if they feel that you don't.
I cannot underscore the word patience there. Well, one of the challenges that I've seen in terms of when you're dealing with individuals who have maybe never had a job or who are not necessarily equipped to just get to work every day on time for a variety of reasons, whether it's they rely on public transportation or there's a lot of other issues in the home. A lot of times that holds people back at their place of employment. And given where the job market is right now, I think employers are more patient today than they were 2 years ago. But if the economy starts to tighten up again, certainly we'll see that lack of patience come back into the fold, which is one of the things that concerns me. Because there are, it's a minor miracle for some people to get out of the house and get to work on time for a variety of reasons. And I've had the opportunity to work with some of these individuals, and when I hear what they have to go through to do something as simple as go to work, it's like, man, you've already accomplished more than I have. Talk to me just about that issue of those barriers that a lot of people face who are trying to do the right thing, who are trying to get to work, who are trying to do things, but because of any number of 25 different things that could happen in a morning, maybe prevent that person from showing up to work on time or prevent that person from excelling in their place of employment. And it's really through no fault of that person, it's just the circumstances that they're coming from.
Actually, I was just dealing with one of those calls on the way here. He sent me a text message. I got one more question. Like, Greg, run into this meeting. 20-year-old kid. He's calling me every day saying, hey, I need to get to work. I need to get to work. It's in Lebanon, and he's on the west side of Indianapolis. And Uber and Lyft is $25 one way. That's gas in our car for what, 2 days now? So he's paying $25 one way, $50, one day to get back and forth to work. $50 to take care of us for at least 3 or 4 days with the gas prices the way they are. So, but I see him trying. I see him, really trying to put his best foot forward, reading at a 3rd grade level. He's learned how to, survive. And he wants to do well. He really wants to do well. So, it's tough. It's real tough. When you've grown up in poverty, you've learned how to survive through poverty, you're now supposed to be graduated from high school, but you're not. And everybody's telling you you're a grown man now. Be a grown man. Well, this grown man in age is really 10 years old psychologically, 13 years old. What 13-year-old knows how to navigate, through this life?
No, we see exactly the same thing. It's a lot for them, some communities, folks that we work with, to literally make it to probation appointments, court hearings, because it is a lot. I think that we also have to recognize some of these places that they're working are triggering some trauma, you know what I mean? And so what we've done is to prepare, our youth and families as best possible on how to navigate those kind of things. But then we've also been very intentional on the partners that we have with employers, right? So we're doing some training with employers, like you need to understand the community that you're in, right? And there needs to be some grace and patience given. So we've had those conversations with staffing companies and things like that. And even with support systems that our families are connected to. We had a mother of 2 that was staying in a shelter. We were actively working to get her an apartment. The shelter here has childcare, but it's not for the women that are actually in the shelter. And she had to be back to the shelter by 3 o'clock. I'm like, well, where's she gonna work? Why can't the child stay here with y'all? Y'all got a whole daycare. So it's advocating for folks in those kind of situations because it's so many barriers that are there that are just unnecessary. You know what I mean? We help out with transportation and bus passes and gas cards and all those things, but folks shouldn't have to jump through hoops just to get, a job. And then, the job that they do get is sometimes it's not at livable wages. You know what I mean? And so we try to just advocate for that as much as possible. And like Mr. Beverly said, they can be chronologically adults, right? 18, 19, 20, 24, but we know what trauma does to youth development, and some of that is impacted, right? And so we have to take that into consideration. Employers need to be aware of those kind of things as well.
And so when we have these conversations, for me as a prosecutor, I don't want repeat business. I don't want to see people come back in the criminal justice system. I don't want people to be a part of the criminal justice system. The two things that I have found that have really worked in terms of making sure we don't see people in the criminal justice system is stable housing and employment. For those of you who don't know, it is impossible to get housing right now. Impossible. I am the Marion County Prosecutor. I have offered to pay people's rent, and I can't get it done. Just because of the housing shortage that we face here in our community. And that's for people who are victims and witnesses on cases, who are trying to relocate and help. That's for individuals who are involved with the criminal justice system. Housing is a real challenge and a real problem in our community right now. And you can't take care of your mental health issues if you don't know where you're going to sleep that night. You can't take care of your addiction issues if you don't know where you're going to sleep. And you're probably not going to make it to work when you're not sure where you're going after work. And so all these additional problems kind of flow from the fact that we don't have stable housing for so many people in our community. So this is a big question, but what can we do to address the housing issues that so many people in our community face right now? I will tell you, as a prosecutor, one of the issues that concerns me more than anything else is the lack of available housing in our community. And just knowing that if you don't have the housing, the impact that it has not only on the adults but the kids is traumatic. So what can we do about that housing issue and the lack of housing? I certainly believe is a root cause of violence in our community. And so if we don't do something about housing, we're going to see more problems with violence.
Yeah, that's a real tough one. It's not like we got the money to go buy houses and put them in it, but how do we collectively come together and do that? I just, when you talk about housing, I just reflect back, and she talked about triggers. That's a trigger for me. It's a trigger for me because my grandfather lived on Baker Street, and he pretty much owned the 800 block of Baker Street, right over by UPUI, right off Indiana Avenue. I go off to college and I come back, he has no housing, and he dies broke. So that is a trigger for me, but at the same time, how do we do what he did back then when he started bringing his family up here from Mississippi and Tennessee? He would buy a house, he would work hard, save money, buy a house, to the point he owned from 801 to 821 Baker Street. So I just think we got to come together as a community to begin to pull our resources to be able to do that. But that's a relational issue as well. Other than that, I don't know what else we can do, because I just don't feel like the people in power understand or care.
We have to get folks at livable wages to even sustain what other housing options come after that. And I'm going to keep saying, match the same energy going into this criminal justice complex. There are abandoned complexes built, complexes here, abandoned homes up and down the streets. These investors are coming in from out of state and buying up all of this stuff. You know, there has to be some kind of community collective-driven effort, city-driven effort that is, you know, put into finding different and alternative housing options. I've seen models across the country that use old hospitals, right, as transitional living spaces. Old school buildings. We have lots of empty ones here. There's options for housing if somebody wants to fund it. I think that, but it makes no difference if we build 1 million houses, if we, you know, turn these amazing spaces into places that are great for healing, for working, living, playing, if folks can't sustain that, which means we have to skill up folks and we have to get some livable wage jobs to be able to sustain whatever efforts that we're doing. That's where we found ourselves in 12 years later. We were doing great work, right? Our recidivism rate has been under 10% for the last 5 years. We're getting them graduated from high schools and GEDs, and they're working. However, as soon as we let go of them, that cycle that you're talking about, Prosecutor Marion, starts all over again because of those issues, because of the root causes. We have been very fortunate and blessed. We got a city grant to do some housing work. So we will be starting some emergency shelter care in transitional housing, specifically for Black men returning from DOC. Indianapolis has the highest recidivism rate for Black men out of Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. I think it's up to like 56% return back within that first year. And so we have to look at what if supportive services do Black men returning from Department of Corrections have. You know, sometimes they just dropped off with a $200 check and saying, figure it out, but so many things have changed, so many needs are different. And so we're trying to work in partnership with Department of Corrections to fill in that gap. We're going in 90 days before they're out, right? What do you want to do? Who can support you? What harm needs to be repaired for you to be able to go back to this family structure, or family system? Then family, are you prepared for this man to be back in your home? If not, what can it look like for you being a natural support? So there's so many layers to it. Housing is one of them, just another one that kind of goes in there. But I think that there are a lot of viable options. There's a lot of plans and what we've seen in other states that can be done here with the right funding.
And just,
Question on the housing. One of the things in most of our community, in my community, was the dilapidation of the houses. We have plenty of houses, but it was designed to let them be, what's the term I'm trying to use? Deteriorate. I love it. And that was another thing with our youth. It even affected me, is going down the street and seeing these dilapidated houses, whatever, that environment, if nothing else, is like, oh, you know, what am I living for with all this? Now they took all the dilapidated houses. We're gone now. And it's going to be harder for us, the type of we're talking about, to get property in that area financially. So all this by design stuff, you see it over and over again. But housing is one of them. It's just so many. And thank you guys for trying to make a difference.
yeah. And I'll get to you in one second. I want to ask a couple more follow-up questions. Just one more thing on housing. For those of you who don't know, the #1 address for people coming out of the Department of Correction is Wheeler Mission. When you leave the Department of Correction, you have to give people an address of where you're going to live. There are far too many people who are coming back into our community where there is no housing plan. And you mentioned the recidivism rate. That is a surefire way to failure if we don't have a better system in place for people who are coming back into our community. And too many people just don't have a legitimate plan. And that's an area that we as a community need to do a better job of offering services so we can help people as they return. We've not a lot of optimism yet, but we're going to have some optimism with this question. You guys work tirelessly. You work with a lot of amazing young people. I've had a chance to meet some of them and work with some of them who have been involved in both of your programs. #1, can you share a success story for us? And #2, how do we define success for kids coming through your program?
Oh, man. I got several stories, but I'll share one. We have a kid that was a part of our program a few years ago, lived on the 218 zip code, where it was 2 trap houses. He was being recruited on a daily basis to get engaged with the activity there. But he was able, through our mentorship and other people engaged in his life, was able to come up out of there. Now, he has the highest clearance security rate in the military.
Wow.
Yeah.
The highest
Wow.
security clearance rate in the military. And then we have another young man that grew up in the same type of conditions, and he's now a junior. Actually, he's a senior. With his credits, he's a senior, but by year, he's a junior, and he had over 50 50 acceptance letters going into the college. And they're both still doing a phenomenal job. There are other stories that I can share, but those are the 2 that just come to mind.
I think we define success a lot of different ways. We take a lot of baby wins. We do have standouts, don't get me wrong. What always, I try to share with people is just the joy, right, in the midst of it all that we get to see every single day with our day reporting program. So those young men are court ordered to us Monday through Friday from 9 to 3. They're expelled from traditional school systems. And when we first started, we were like, why are they running around like, hitting, playing tag, hide and go seek? Like, they were just acting extremely childish to be teenage boys that are high school age. And we quickly realized that they were in this safe space to be children, right? They didn't have to have the societal armor on. And so we got to see the joy. We got to see the resilience in all of it. We got to see the changes in their mindset when we called them mentors or scholars or advocates. They started to take on those identities instead of delinquent and those kind of things. And so, yes, we've had the ones that have graduated. We have Alyssa Gaines, who's the National Youth Poet Laureate, just named recently. She grew up on the East Side. She's at Harvard now. We have, the ones that are doing well, but I find joy in the ones that come back and talk to us about, I have my certifications now. I did get my GED now. I've held down this job for the last 6 months. Or they come show us pictures of the newborns, you know what I mean? Because that means that we made that connection and we built those relationships with them, you know what I mean? So those for me are all wins when we have those moments with them.
Yeah, and she said baby steps. It made me remember this one kid. He's now living out of state. We had to move him out of the city. But he was 17 years old. He called himself trying to rob drug dealers, and they caught up with him. And he tried to rob somebody else. They put 5 bullets in him. He survived. And I had been trying to recruit him before all of this happened. Now that that happened, and I'm going to get to the good part, but now that this happened, he comes running to me saying, I need help. And I said, are you coming to me because you're afraid or because you really want to make the change? He said both.
Okay.
So I didn't know what to do with him at that point because we were going through some other things with our youth. So I put him with our youth community council summit team. And he sat in a meeting one day and we was talking about the prison pipeline. And they were sharing all of these stories about, how the schools are sending our black boys to prison for lack of education or whatever that is going on. And he sat there in the meeting, he said, it's not the teacher's fault that black boys are going to prison. But then when I said to him, I said, share your story with the people. And as he began to share his story, the light bulb popped on. And that was success because now he was able to relate. What had happened was, and Kia said this earlier, he got kicked out of school because he was hungry and he was angry, and the teacher said something to him that triggered him and he cussed her. Instead of figuring out what was going on with him, she sent him down, he gets suspended. And so when he was telling his story to these other high school students, the light bulb popped on. And that was a success for him because now he was able to make the connection that he had never made before. Now he's doing well, he's in another city. We had to get him out of the city because if we didn't, There's been another murder. But I just talked to his mother a couple of weeks ago, and he's a supervisor at a warehouse.
Mr. Randall, you had a question?
So there is an educator, and his name is Dr. Jeffrey Duncan Andre, and he speaks on hope theory. And a part of that is the Friends of Hope, including Audacious Hope, which is walking with young people through their worst times. A lot of times we talk about successes when they have their accomplishments, but as a society, we have a history of when they aren't successful and they reoffend, they get in trouble, they end back in jail. A lot of people cut them off. They forget about them. And when Simeon was on the screen, it made me think about all the young men that I'm working with in the jail, all of the homicide charges, all the armed robbery charges, and we still see them as humans. And we're not defining them as their charge, and that is not a representation of their humanity. So for Kia and Anthony, can you please attest to everybody in this room, the folks watching, and the major news outlets who do a poor job at covering positive storytelling, on why we can't forget about the ones who make mistakes?
I knew you was here to start some stuff. Brandon is the Director of Community Engagement with Voices Corporation. Power and Promise program falls under his lead. And what he has done with that program has been absolutely incredible. We went from having 150 graduates a year to almost 500. And he was instrumental in getting voices inside of the Marion County Jail and making sure that those voices were being heard. I kind of touched on it a little bit. On what we see day to day with them. We get to see the joy, we get to see the resilience and things like that. But if you think about what they see and what's being told to them daily throughout the news, what are the imageries that they're being exposed to, right? You can even hear it in the way that they talk to them, that they label them in the news media. It's men, it's delinquent, it's this, and that. It's all these things that are poor, with their neighborhood or things like that. And I think it's really important for the other side of that to be shown, right? Because there's a lot of education, a lot of educated folks. There's a lot of folks that are really trying. There's a lot of folks that just made a mistake, right? Our agency is grounded in healing-centered engagement. And part of that is seeing folks beyond that worst day. If I had social media growing up, I wouldn't be sitting on this panel right now as a child of the West Township. But imagine that being replayed every single day, and they're bombarded with this imagery and the words and, folks talking down about who they are in their communities. And so I think it's very important for folks to advocate and affirm young people's identity, you know what I mean? Their passions, their dreams, and their goals, and that needs to be spotlighted just as much as, the negativity that's out there as well. I hope that answered your question, sir.
Yeah, well, and I just did how do we change the narrative around this news media that continue to perpetuate violence as well against our young men, and women now. Yeah, exactly. Positive stories don't sell, and so that's the problem. So we do have social media, and so one of the things that we're doing is we just got blessed to work with IU football team. 114 football players at IU Bloomington are now telling positive stories on social media through a Team Up for Peace campaign that came out of the Race and Trace conference that we had a couple of weeks ago. And then in addition to that, we got the second part of that campaign that's going to take place with high school basketball teams. We have about 10 high school teams and still adding that are going to start wearing warm-up jerseys, and they're going to all have the same warm-up jerseys. And those basketball players who have influence are going to be trying to influence their team and their school to make better choices. And so, like Kid said earlier, we're trying to empower our youth to carry a positive message themselves because the media won't do it. And we need your help to do that as well.
And just to follow up on that, so what Anthony's talking about is we're fortunate enough to be a part of a discussion with Trish Jackson Davis and Grace Thompson, who play basketball at IU. We brought in a bunch of the area high school basketball teams. And I was really impressed at the level of engagement amongst those kids. And the challenge was, how can you guys be leaders, not only on your basketball team, but in your school, in your community, on your block, to keep kids out of violence? How can you use your profile and your influence to help your friend, when there's a social media beef, understand that, you know, pulling a weapon isn't the way to solve those problems? And just really an incredible discussion, and I was really impressed with the level of insight that all of those kids had. And it goes back to that issue of there is a lot of positivity that's out there. And there is a lot of positive news, and there's a lot of people doing some really great things. It just depends on, you know, where you look for your news. And I think that, you know, one of the things that people always ask me is, what can we do to help? And what can we do to make a difference? And I think part of that is highlighting the positive things. I can tell you as the prosecutor, more often than not, you know, we're having a conversation right now about root causes. Like, what is driving this behavior? What is causing this behavior? If you turn on the news any night, usually the question is, why wasn't this person already in jail? That's usually the answer to the media, which is obviously an oversimplification of a really difficult and challenging problems that we're facing in our community. And so anything that you guys can do to help further that discussion and say, hey, it's probably a little bit more complicated than that, and there are root cause issues, let's talk about those things. The answers are not easy. In fact, they're very complicated, and we're not going to solve them in an hour, and we certainly didn't suggest to you that we were going to solve them in an hour. But what we did want to do is highlight that these issues exist, that there are people in our community trying to work on those issues and make a difference in our community and try to help young people as they navigate some really challenging times. But this idea that we're going to solve it with one program is just not accurate. And we need to make sure that we're being honest with ourselves and honest with the community as a whole about what can be done to tackle these issues. But ignoring root cause issues is why we're in the situation we're in right now, in my humble opinion. I saw you have your hand up, sir.
Yeah, the only thing, I'd just like to take this time to let people know that Indianapolis is very fortunate to have the resources we do. I work with veterans quite a bit, and the mayor helped me get free bus passes for veterans. I don't know if you know it or not, but if you're a veteran, you can take $2 and your ID down to the bus station, and they'll give you a permanent ID for veterans can ride bus passes for free. Also, Indigo has got a program that if you've got a 501c3 organization, you can apply for free bus passes. I did the other. I haven't seen you in a while. And you can apply for daily passes or 31-day passes. Most organizations, Horizon House, PACE, VOA, HVAF, Workforce One, they've all got plenty of bus passes to offer people, especially if they help you get jobs. But again, and then there's always 211. A lot of people don't know about 211. You can call 211 24 hours a day, and there's somebody there to answer the phone and, you know, answer whatever information, whether you need a fan in the summer, whether you need help with bus passes, whether you need food brought to your house, whether you need to know where food pantry is, etc. And if you know somebody's suicidal, now the federal government, including in Indiana, has got a suicide hotline number, 988. You can call 988 anytime, 24 hours a day, and get in touch with somebody to help you, prevent suicide. And if you're a veteran, you dial the same number and you hit 1 and you get a veteran person. But again, Indianapolis and CHIP, the Coalition to End Homelessness, you can go to chipindy.org. They've got what they call a handbook for help. It's got all this information in it. It's got all the shelters. Now, the bad news about the shelters is right now the shelters are full. And the worst even news is there's no more COVA money for hotel rooms this year. There you go. This gentleman's got them right here. Everything you need to know about homelessness are in those books, or to help you on homelessness. Resource book. But there's an awful lot of good organizations out there, ready, willing, and able to help people. But you have to find them. You don't expect them to come to you. You need to go out and find them.
Well, and we're getting close to our time here, so I'll get everybody out on this question right here. We kind of asked individually what does success look like. what is the program, or what do you guys do in your organization that you're most proud of? Can you point to a specific program or something that you do that you're like, this is an example of success, and people out there in the community, this is why you should support Voices, this is why you should stop the violence ending? What would you point to if you're giving kind of your elevator pitch to someone who might be watching out there right now, who's thinking, hey, I'd love to support Voices, that's great, or I'd love to support Mr. Beverly. Anthony's shaking his head, so we'll let him get first crack at why your organization works and what's your most successful program.
Like I said, there's a couple, but our mission is to be a catalyst for social change, empowering people in high crime areas to overcome poverty and crime. And we do that through prevention, intervention, retention, and recovery. Most of the work we do is on the front end with prevention. And so with the prevention piece, we have a Strengthening Families workshop that we bring both youth and family in, and we help parents understand, how to love your child, but set age-appropriate limits. You don't give a 10-year-old the keys to your car, right? But we also try to help youth understand how to communicate to their parents. Because a lot of times our youth just want to express themselves, and most parents are still old school. Just do as I say, not as I do. Just those kind of things. And so we're trying to help youth understand, how do I say this in a way where I don't get knocked upside my head? And that becomes challenging. So that's one. There's several others, but I'll just share that one.
Our agency is grounded on our 4 pillars, which is healed, creative, disciplined, and educated. Our goal is complete community transformation, right? And I think what we do really well is centering the experiences of youth and families and putting them in positions of power to tell us how to help them, right? I think we are really, really, really good at relationship building and partnership, right? Voices cannot do this by itself. There's a lot of folks here that need help. We only are touching 700 of them annually. But I do think it's gonna take that community mindset and that village mentality, right? My mom worked second shift at General Motors before she retired from there. And so she wasn't home when I got home from track practice. It was just me and my sister. We had lots of free time. It could have left real quick for me. But she created an incredible village and trusted that village, right? So it was the neighbors, it was my track coach, it was people that she had around us that made sure that they filled in the gap. And so I think that's what we're trying to do and build with our organization, is really get back to that village mentality. There's an African proverb that I love, and it says, the child that's not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And I feel like that's what we're seeing, right? And so we have to figure out how to get back to that village, a place of safe, healing, trusting relationships in our communities, so that we can start to see the difference.
So let's give it up for our panelists. We really appreciate your willingness to come in and share. Again, this is a tough topic, and we know there are no simple answers or solutions, but we appreciate you sharing your perspective with us, and I know you gave a lot of us things to think about. Next week's topic is going to be on guns and the Crime Gun Intelligence Center here in Indianapolis, which will be a very hopefully informative discussion. We look forward to seeing everybody